this is the time of year we think of Remembrance. And Remembrance Day normally falls on the 11th of November or on the Sunday nearest to the 11th of November, harking back to the armistice of the First World War. And the First World War still features, I think, in our mental images of remembrance, although there is much more than a century of further suffering to remember at this time of year. But as we continue our exploration through the library here, through the collection in the very Reverend William McMillan Library, I'd like to look at one little booklet that takes us back to the armistice, to the end of the First World War. Actually a very rare book, although at the time many thousands were issued. And the book is this one. It's called For Remembrance. And it's a little booklet that was issued to all Unitarian soldiers at the end of the First World War. And that would have included all of those who belonged to non-subscribing Presbyterian churches. There's a little note at the front. It is estimated, as nearly as the information at hand permits, that the number of Unitarians enrolled in HM forces during the war was about 10,000. Of these, it is known that upwards of 1,000 died. A permanent roll of honour is to be kept at Essex Hall, London. And a few years ago, I published a book which listed all the men and women of our churches in Ireland who had served in the First World War in our churches, with a special list of biographies of those who were killed. But this little book was given to all the people who served in the forces in the First World War who returned home at the end of the war. The front page has a place where the recipient of the book can record their name, rank, when they enrolled and when they were demobilized, as well as their personal events. And then the next page describes the book as For Remembrance, Souvenir of the Great War. Now the prologue states, "This is not the kind of booklet that is to be read once and then tossed aside. If it attains to anything like its aim, it will be a real keepsake, an abiding record of the owner's place and part in our nation's mightiest struggle, a reminder of comrades cherished though gone, and of others happily not gone, but cherished with an attachment such as only comes out of a common share of life in camp and field, of danger borne and efforts renewed again and again for the same noble ideals." So it's a book rooted in the experience of the serviceman in the First World War. And it begins with a number of quotations from various sources, all of them reflecting on remembrance, and then a number of very short articles, 6 short articles by certain ministers. Now these ministers are Henry Gow, John Ellis, R. Nichol Cross, Lawrence Redfern, C. Arthur Piper and W. H. Drummond. Now there is quite a strong Ulster connection with at least 3 of those ministers. So John Ellis, who was minister at the time of Stalybridge, writes a short piece, the second piece. And it's clear from what he writes that he was with the 36th Ulster Division. In fact, he was serving with the YMCA. None of our ministers were chaplains because we weren't considered a big enough denomination to appoint chaplains. But many ministers served alongside the troops with the YMCA in the First World War. Another example would be the Reverend Alfred Turner, who was minister in Temple Patrick. But John Ellis was minister in Stalybridge, and he was there with the 36th Ulster Division towards the end of the First World War. Another interesting name to find as a contributor is the Reverend R. Nichol Cross, then Minister of Leeds. And he served in the First World War as a private in the Royal Army Medical Corps. A few years later, in 1928, he came to Belfast and was Minister of First Belfast for about 10 years before he went to Oxford to be Principal of Manchester College, Oxford. And this deeply scholarly man, perhaps in some ways quite an unworldly man, nevertheless served as a private in the Army Medical Corps for many years of the First World War. And after the war, he reflected, I suppose, on his own experience of the people he knew in his hometown of Glasgow. He writes, "Thousand and thousand they came from fireside chums, from wains and wife, from lovers, from towns and cities, valleys and hillsides they gathered, the youth with myriads of the middle-aged of Britain, to train in huge camps that shot up everywhere like mushroom growths. Thousand on thousand they moved across to Belgium and France and eastern lands, clad in khaki, loaded with accoutrements, and plunged into the storm of death. Month after month, year after year, they fronted the Herculean task, living at the mouth of hell in conditions unfit for men. Only those who have gone through it know what it meant. The coarseness, the crudeness, the bestiality, the monotony of the life and work. Yet even through it all was the smile, the song, the bright cheerio, the flashing heroism, scintillations of stars in the Walpurgis night of devils. Many, too many, have not returned. To them, the remembrance of undying gratitude." And then the last and the longest article is written by the Reverend William Hamilton Drummond. And he was the grandson of another William Hamilton Drummond. And he succeeded his grandfather as minister of Belfast's second congregation of what by then was All Souls Church. W.H. Drummond was minister of All Souls Church from 1900 to 1909, when he went to London to be editor of the Inquirer. But he also served with the YMCA in the First World War. And the YMCA were there to give comforts to troops, places to stay, places to be warm, food and so on, and to help the troops. They were alongside the troops as they went into battle. So a number of ministers in this little book who served alongside soldiers, not as chaplains, but as something like a chaplain. And the whole little book is a very interesting piece of remembrance. And at the back, the very last part of the book is an epilogue written by the Reverend W.G. Tarrant. And he writes, "What suits the soul of honour best is not to boast an honoured name, a well-won ribbon on the breast, a record on the scroll of fame. These may arrive or miss their way, but he that is a man right through holds on content to serve his day, both-handed as a man should do. In war and peace alike his ends are justice and the generous thing. His hand is ready for his friends, his laugh is like the joy of spring. O spring of youth, laugh once again and fill the world with happy men." The little book is a reminder of the terrible experience of the First World War, the whole generation suffered through, that caused the deaths of many thousands upon thousands of people who joined up to see service in the front. And this little book is one part of that national experience. It's the experience of a particular denomination of people from a particular church. It's their act of remembrance. And it's interesting that something that was intended as a keepsake seems to have been kept in that light and is now such a rare thing to find anywhere. So we're very fortunate to have one in our library here in Dunmurry.